not your primary care guys, but your specialist. And my job essentially was recruiting these specialists to speak to other physicians about Glaxo products.
Now, I know that we spoke before, and I asked you about the kickbacks and the bribery to doctors. I know that in that position as a specialist, one of your jobs was to recruit doctors and make sure they were paid very well to go on speaking gigs. You told me they could make as much as $2,000 for a 30-minute speech promoting a drug to other physicians. Tell us about how that worked.
Well, how that works is, depending on how desirable the physician is, interestingly enough, there's a website where people can look and see if your personal physician is in the pocket of Big Pharma. It's called ProPublica.com. And you can, and it only goes back for about a year. Of course, pharma doesn't want to disclose what they've been paying the physicians before that. But anyway, it's based upon how desirable the speaker is, meaning how well thought of he was, or if they were a high writer, if they wrote a lot of prescriptions, if they had a lot of business. And it could be anywhere from $500 a talk to $2,500 was one of the most that one of my physicians got.
But they could stack these. They could have multiple talks in one day. I remember you saying, so they could rack up, let's say, $6,000 in one day, and it was so lucrative for some doctors, these kickbacks, that they actually stopped seeing patients in their own practice and just became sort of professional speakers, making all this money.
Right. Well, I mean, as I told you before, I mean, some of these offices I would go. I'm sorry about the dog barking.
It's all right. He's enthusiastic about this too.
Yeah, she sure is. Anyway, a lot of these, many times I would walk into offices and docs are like, "Oh, you're the guy who sets up the programs. Can you get me a gig?" And so these docs, they would all their travel was paid for. They would schedule them for sometimes a breakfast meeting, a lunch meeting, and a dinner meeting all in one day. And so they get 3 honorariums is what they call it. And so they get 3 of their speaking fees.
So this was characterized by the Department of Justice as a system of kickbacks, and it really is generally just called bribery. It seems like these doctors were being financially incentivized or sort of paid as a, quote, speaking gig when they would write higher prescriptions for the GlaxoSmithKline drugs. But a lot of these doctors really in the open market wouldn't command those kinds of speaking fees, and often they would just speak to just maybe 6 people at a time or things like that. Is that correct?
That's correct. I even had one physician. We flew to Louisiana, and he wanted me to go with him, and he spoke to one physician. So there was 5 drug reps, 1 physician, the doctor that I brought in, and we went to a fish camp in Louisiana. And I don't recall what his honorarium was at the time, but it was a nice weekend for him to go home to his hometown, and so I mean it's a pretty nasty business. I mean it's and as I said, if you read ProPublica, you can see that there's guys still making a lot of money doing this.
Well, yeah, one doctor, this came out in the Department of Justice lawsuit or settlement documents. One doctor was paid, I believe, around $2 million. It also came out that another celebrity radio doctor had received, I think, $275,000. That was reported in the Wall Street Journal. And that he then went on the air and discussed, I think, intimacy or depression during intimacy, but failed to disclose to his audience that he was taking money from the drug company.
That's right. I think that was Dr. Drew.
Yeah, right, Dr. Drew.
Dr. Drew, and he was discussing intimacy and depression because many of the SSRIs have sexual side effects, a decreased libido. And so what Glaxo decided to do was that because Wellbutrin's not an SSRI, they decided to promote it to increase libido. And that's when they came up with that catchphrase, the happy, horny, skinny drug. It was, these are chemical compounds that are very dangerous, and they're not toys. It's not a game. And unfortunately, the company just seems very cavalier in the way that they handled it.
Now, you told me in a previous conversation, and folks, you can check out some of these quotes on naturalnews.com, also on Infowars.com. I'm sure these quotes will be there. Remind the guys to post that from our site, that most of the slideshows that these physicians used during their speeches, for which they were receiving pretty big dollars, some of them, or most of them, actually came from the company marketing departments. And
that's correct.
So essentially, the company would hand them money, pay their airfare, set up the hotel, and then give them a PowerPoint presentation to go out and speak?
That's correct. Give them a PowerPoint presentation. And then, it was one of the jobs of the representative, because there would always be a representative or manager at these conferences or these continuing medical education, a little tongue in cheek there.
Right, but just along those lines, this kind of, quote, education is required by state medical licensing boards for doctors to keep their licenses. They have to go and submit themselves to this kind of propaganda, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's a big facade. It's absolutely a facade. And at some point in time, myself and Greg Thorpe just said, this is wrong. And what if a child has a seizure because of the drug that we're promoting is given to a child when it's not even indicated? It's for 18 and above. It's clearly stated in the package insert. It's not for children. Who's at fault there? And where does the buck stop?
Right. I have that question for you. What caused you to stand up and speak out when most people would be happy to have a cushy job? I mean, you've been out of work. I think you were blackballed by the pharmaceutical industry. I know you're not claiming that, but that's just what it looks like to me. You've been out of work for now, 10 years during this battle?
I've had some odd jobs, since then, but, on all intents and purposes, I have never financially recovered. When I left the company, I was making about $140,000 a year. And so, because of pending litigation, I can't discuss.
Yeah, I understand.
I can't discuss the circumstances that led to my dismissal.
Sure. And by the way, the law firm, I want to give a shout out to Kenny and McCafferty out of Philadelphia. That law firm specializes in whistleblower cases, and they took on your case, and they achieved quite an amazing victory, the largest settlement in the history. And that law firm specializes in fraud cases, medical fraud, sometimes tax fraud. I see your dog very much approves of that as well.
Yeah, I wish I could. I know we're under time constraints, or I'd go and try to get her to stifle. I apologize, Izzy.
That's right. That's right. Let me throw in a comment here. Yeah, go if you want to do that.
Let me grab the dog. I'm sorry.
Let me throw in some comments here while you're doing that. We'll have better audio clarity for everybody. But folks, this is real radio. This is live radio. And Blair Hamrick, that's where he lives. He gave up a cushy job. It could have been a very wealthy situation for him. He gave that up to tell the truth, to blow the whistle, so that he could then help protect other people from this kind of thing going on. And by the way, he told me in a previous interview that at the time he left GlaxoSmithKline, they had over 40,000 speakers on their speakers bureau. So just as we were talking about this, $2,000 for 30 minutes that the doctors were getting paid as, quote, kickbacks, it turns out there were more than 40,000. The court documents revealed there were 49,000 speakers on Glaxo's Speakers Bureau, which, again, even the Department of Justice characterizes as a kind of an elaborate network of kickbacks that Glaxo has pleaded guilty to conducting. This is not a debate. It's not like Glaxo is denying this. They have pleaded guilty to this, and they said we're gonna make some changes. We're gonna do better. But they pleaded guilty to criminal fraud. Go ahead, Blair.
One of the things that's interesting and why, I'm not with the company anymore, and I've been away for a while, so I can't attest to what's going on currently. But you're talking about compounds. Right now in the newspaper, they made a big to do about stopping paying their reps on market share and going to educating physicians, and that's how they're going to start paying their reps. But how much can you educate a physician on a compound that's 30 years old or 25 years old? I mean, you've got a drug like, for instance, Advir, that is a new compound, but it's basically two very old compounds together.
That's right.
So how much more education is a person with a business degree going to give a physician that did 10 years of school on a compound that's 25 years old?
Well, that's a really good point. And, the drug companies are desperate to try to come up with new combinations that they then spin as being breakthrough drugs when, like you described, they're really the same old chemicals just sort of repackaged. But let's talk about off-label marketing and marketing to children, because this is something else that Glaxo pleaded guilty to.
That's correct.
They admitted that they were illegally or in violation of FDA regulations, I should say, marketing these drugs to children that were never approved for children, never even tested for children, no safety record for children. Give us the lowdown on that, Blair, as the insider who saw it firsthand.
Well, sure. I mean, you're talking about drugs where just a % market share can mean a huge sum of money. So, the company was very concerned about patent expirations on these compounds, and they were trying to squeeze every penny they could. So, they would say with like Wellbutrin or Paxil, they were trying to squeeze every penny they could. So they were trying to find new avenues to generate more money. And, one of the things that you got to ask yourself is, like, when you are selling off-label to a child, the package insert has dosing and administration. Well, what do you tell a doctor, who's going to use it on a 12-year-old? I mean, how do you tell them to dose it? Well, I mean, there's some inherent dangers with that.
But just to be clear, Blair, so when you were in meetings with your managers being trained on how to approach doctors and what to say, I just want to be clear, were they telling you specifically, you push this drug for children, wink, wink, or how did that go down? What actually took place?
Well, sure. There was absolutely. In fact, you can look in some of the court documents. There's some documents about to the effect that that show that they were wanting to promote Wellbutrin for children in a disease state, I don't want to say too much, but the allegations in the document are for ADHD in children. So, it was a nod, wink, wink. We all, there was a written set of rules, and then there were the real rules, and the real rules were basically, if you didn't sell off label, you weren't going to get the market shares, and if you didn't get the market shares, you wouldn't be employed very long.
So there was this really aggressive push, and obviously your salary was tied into probably bonuses for how many prescriptions were written by doctors off label and on label both. Is that how it worked?
That's correct. And they couldn't, with the way that they were tracking the prescriptions, they couldn't distinguish what was on label or what was off label. It was, it was just get the prescriptions at whatever cost. And if, and like you said, if you weren't making the numbers, you were then, if you were falling to the bottom half of the pool, then they would target you and coach you to start pulling your numbers up. And so the way to get numbers up was to do speaking programs,